Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Deeds. I'm on the core applications team at ITS, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the GitHub Enterprise Service today. So I just want to start off with a quick overview of what GitHub is exactly. It's one of the largest hosts for Git repositories, and a Git repo is just a way of doing code storage and version control. So you'll have like a copy of your code on your machine and then a copy in GitHub. And then every time you sync your local copy to GitHub, it's keeping a record of all the changes you made. And then GitHub is like that central point for collaboration for millions of developers and open source projects all over the world. And I'm sure many of the open source projects that you all are currently using are hosted on GitHub. And then what exactly is GitHub Enterprise? It's just a cloud-based SaaS product from GitHub that allows the University of Michigan to host to manage organizations from all over the university, and they exist under one unified structure that take advantage of the same features and shared resources. And then that structure is laid out with our enterprise account on top. And then within that are all the organizations. And then in each organization would be your individual code repositories that you manage. And then, as I mentioned, we get additional features and privacy controls as an enterprise, like being able to put access to the enterprise behind single sign-on. And then it's important to note that the UM GitHub service is approved for moderate to low classified data. So I've linked the exact definition in the slide, but sensitive data like personally identifiable information and FERPA data is permitted, while data like ITAR, FSMA, HIPAA is not permitted in the GitHub service. So now we get into what exactly the service offers. So the base GitHub service is free and covers, I would say, 90% of the typical usage that we see of GitHub. So that includes unlimited creation of public and private repositories. GitHub's issue and project tracking features are also included in that. And then GitHub's Pages and Wikis features are also free to use. Pages lets you host static web pages right from your GitHub repository. So it's super easy and simple to get a web page just up and available to anybody in the world. And then Wikis lets you create a wiki inside your repository for like documenting your code or just storing information about your project. It's also, I just want to note that pages can also be just limited to members of your organization, I believe. And then you also have access to GitHub Actions, which is GitHub's CI/CD platform, and it essentially allows you to build, test, and deploy your code right from within GitHub. And there's two ways of using actions in GitHub. You can either use GitHub's cloud-based runner servers or use a self-hosted runner server. And these are just how you would run your CI/CD workflow. And then for GitHub's cloud runners, 100,000 action minutes are provided to campus each month at no cost. And then on the self-hosted side, ITS provides self-hosted runners that are available for you to use at no cost that we manage. And then you can also easily set up your own self-hosted runners if just for your organization, and that's useful if privacy is a really big concern for you, or you need your runner configured in a super specific way, and that'll just be available to your organization. And then we also have GitHub enterprise support included with our enterprise license. Just to continue with some more features, GitHub offers these paid features that you can take advantage of. But if you do choose to use any of these features, just keep in mind that cost is passed on to your organization. This includes GitHub's cloud-based development environments called code spaces, the ability to host your own software packages, either public or private, through GitHub package storage, and the ability to use Git large file storage. So if any individual file in your repository is between 100 megabytes and 5 gigabytes, GitHub requires you to use GitHub large file storage. GitHub also offers its Copilot AI coding tool. And this GitHub just describes Copilot as your AI pair programmer, and it's essentially a tool that integrates with your IDE and provides automatic code completion using AI. And one common question we get about this is, if I use Copilot, is my data safe, or does GitHub use my code to train the AI? And the answer is, for the GitHub enterprise environment, no. GitHub uses neither Copilot business or enterprise data to train its models. So that's good to know. And then based on my conversations with existing teams and then existing researchers in the GitHub service, privacy and the ability to collaborate on your code are pretty important. And in the enterprise environment, you have full control over your organization and how access is granted to your repositories. So you can invite new members to your organization, either as like owners of the organization or just as standard members with standard repository access. You can create teams within your organization and then limit access to repositories just to specific teams. And then there's 3 levels of privacy that you can set for your repositories. So a private repository can be accessed just by members of your organization. And then an internal repository can be accessed by any other member of Enterprise GitHub, and that's great for sharing, across different teams within the university. And then you can also set your repository to public, and that can be accessed by anybody on the internet. And then some of you may be working with collaborators external to the university, and since the GitHub service is behind single sign-on, they won't be able to be added directly as members to your organization, but GitHub allows you to add them to your repository as external collaborators, so they can access your code without having to require you to make your repository public and open to everybody else. And it's really easy to manage project access through like every step of your project. So just as an example, say you're a researcher, you're just getting started with a new project and you want to keep everything locked down. It could easily just be you in your organization, or you can just invite a few specific people. And then, you could use GitHub's project features to track and plan your work. GitHub Projects is similar to like a Jira or Trello, if you've used those before. And if you're ready for people to review your work, you can just invite them to your repository as with a read-only access, so they don't, mess anything up. And at the end of your project, you can even like open your repository to the world, set it public, and then share your research with everybody. And then you can use GitHub Pages to create like a simple static website to like show off and explain your work. And then, if any of this sounds interesting to you, you can visit this link on this slide and easily request a new organization. Or if you're already using GitHub and you have an organization, we can easily migrate that into the GitHub enterprise environment if you want to take advantage of these features. Just keep in mind, you do need to be a member of an organization within the enterprise to get access to the enterprise environment. So if you go out right now and try to get access to the enterprise environment, it's not going to let you. You need to be a part of a member, or you have to be a member of an organization first. And then I've linked our service page, which includes a lot of this information, and also the link on this page. And then I've also linked some useful documentation if you're just getting started with GitHub. And then you can always reach out to our team on Slack or submit a ticket with the Service Center if you have any questions. Thanks for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions right now.
Now, Matt, could you tell us a little bit more about the project part of GitHub?
Yeah, so it's GitHub's take on like task tracking software. So it's designed to be used with like, GitHub issues where someone will submit like an issue with your code, and then you can like track the progress of like, I'm working on this, or I can assign this to somebody else on the team, and then we can move it to complete, and then we can, document that. We also do have some teams within ITS, I think campus teams as well, that are using GitHub projects just on its own without any code in their repository, just as like a replacement for Jira. And it seems to be working pretty well for them.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. That was pretty helpful. All right, so next we have David, Nowell, and I believe Wei is here as well.
Yep, great, thank you. So I manage the DevOps team in HITS, Michigan Medicine, and we run GitLab for Michigan Medicine. And I don't have a full presentation because I figured Matt was going to be showing you kind of what Git is. So I thought I'd talk briefly about some of the differences between what we run and what campus runs, and then kind of go through a little bit of a demo just to show you kind of some of the CI/CD features available. So campus has GitHub, which is recently bought by Microsoft, so it integrates nicely with Azure and the Microsoft suite, and it is standalone. We're doing GitLab. To be honest, GitLab and GitHub are pretty similar. All the major features they both have. We do run it in. We host GitLab ourselves. It runs in Google Cloud, but it can connect back to campus to work on with data there as well. We have the Enterprise Edition, which means if you ever look at GitLab.com and see all the features, yes, we have the features. If container scanning, we have wikis, project management type stuff. Really, I was trying to look at the, like why choose one versus the other, and they're pretty similar. So, from feature parity, it's not a huge discrepancy. Ours is only available to those of you that are in Michigan Medicine. So that is something to note. So yeah, I thought I would just kind of show you what CI/CD is. I'm hoping this isn't too remedial, but if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of neat to see. So the way, and GitLab has what are called runners, and they are it spins up these execution environments to do jobs for you when a change is made to your repository. GitHub has the same thing, and they call them actions. So I created just a very simple Git repository, and it's basically, here's some data, 3 users. There's a README, which is just the sample README. And the real meat of this repository is GitLab requires you to have a certain format for your CI/CD pipelines. These are actions that run anytime you make a change to your repository. Or you can, what's actually kind of neat too, is you can schedule them. You can just run them manually without making changes to your repository if you want. And they're YAML files, and just, here's a sample. So this is telling it, image is telling it what container to run it in. We have the ability to, if I don't know that you're familiar with Docker and containers, but a container is basically like a super small Linux VM, and they can come preloaded with certain applications. So, you could have a container that already has, let's say, Python and a bunch of Python libraries in it, or R, what have you. So this just happens to be a container that my team uses. And then we define a few different stages that we want to run during every time this repository is updated. So in this case, and most of these are just they're not really doing anything. I'm just kind of showing you, you have like one stage is building. We build something, and then another stage is test, and there's actually going to be 2 jobs in test. And then deployment. We could deploy to sample things we've done or we've seen done. Deploy a website. Go, send it off to to your web hosting provider with whatever changes you've made, and deploy it, or deploy a Java app, that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a change to my Git repository and show you what's happening. I'm going to do it all in the GUI. Normally, when you're working with Git, you'd probably work on a command line or a Git application, but you can work directly through the website itself. So we're just going to update this data file. And we'll put a new user in. And a commit message. Okay, so we've just updated our repository. And in this build area, we can go to our pipelines and see that something new should be running. And we see, so we click on this pipeline, it says it's running, and there are 4 jobs in here. And I didn't mention this, but in that YAML file, how we had those stages, they actually, one has to complete successfully to move on to the next one. So we just ran, and build job just ran, which I will show you in a minute, and now these 2 are running, and that they were waiting, and this one was waiting, and they're moving along, but I'll show you what we get here. So build job runs, and there's a lot of stuff here. In the background, we have Kubernetes, which is a container management system, and that spins up a brand new Docker container for your job to run in. So this is all kind of Kubernetes nonsense you don't need to worry about. And then down here is what we're actually doing. And we're just echoing, hello, GitLab user. And that succeeded, which is then we can move on to these next test jobs. This test job here, it just reads that file we updated, the one with the user info, user 3, 1, 2, 4. This test job here just does something with your data. In this case, I just did a sort. But, as you can imagine, I'm sure there's all sorts of fancy data things you could actually be doing here. And finally, this deploy job doesn't really, obviously it's not really doing anything, but we could use a variable. I've seen cases where we'll put in a password or an SSH key to deploy. And let me show you where that is. All right. So under our settings for CI/CD, and this setting is tied to this repository. So only people that are granted access to work in your repository are able to see this. But we have a variable here, and we're going to reveal values. And I just call this var1, and we can call it whatever we want, and here's the value. So when you're deploying using CI/CD pipelines in the repository itself, or I'm sorry, in kind of the metadata for your repository, the settings in GitLab, you can have variables for deployment. But what's cool is if you share this repository with someone and give them read access, they'll never see these variables. So they can see kind of how you're doing it, but they won't have the passwords that you use to deploy your code or your artifacts or what have you out somewhere else. So that's kind of in a nutshell and super fast CI/CD. It's, we're not really doing anything useful in this one, but it's, you kind of see how you could do something interesting. The other thing I thought you guys might be interested in here, and Matthew did touch on this briefly, so I just thought I'd show you, GitLab has the same sort of thing. We also have a wiki, which is in, so you can keep your documentation in the actual repository itself, which is useful for, kind of how to deploy, how to do things. But if there are things that you want to track, say you have and some people just use just like the wiki and just have an actual documentation repository with very little in it, and then just a wiki. Or you can tie a wiki to a specific project, but here's what the wiki looks like. And I set up a couple sub pages in here. That's a new one, but nothing terribly exciting here, but again, just thought you might find it interesting. That's really the things I want to show you. I thought I'd leave it open to questions at this point. And if you want access to the Michigan Medicine GitLab instance, there's a ServiceNow request you can put in, or you can reach out to me and I can send you a link.
Our team has started using GitLab. Have you? It is safe for PHI, or is that is it? Do we have it? Is it hosted here, or?
Well, it's hosted in the cloud, which is,
Yeah.
We do have it certified, but IA does. Well, I know that IA, for instance, they're not letting us store passwords in repositories themselves. For actual data, sensitive data, I think we can do it, but I would put in, I would check with IA before you do that. Wei, are you familiar with the process for that?
Oh yeah, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, I do not know any current user have PHI in their repository.
Yeah, we really try to, treat GitLab as a, more of a code tool than data.
That was hey team, it's Reema Kadri from Family Medicine joining late. That was my first thought is, I don't look at what we do in GitHub as a place to store things so much as a place where things where my code lives for my various projects. But I guess and when we don't use GitHub to process the data ourselves either, which is where I guess the question would be, is data passing through it, even if it's not living there? Okay.
Well, and that's an interesting question, because for instance, I could see a use case where, you have some PHI somewhere else, and then you put access information in the variables and process it with kind of a pipeline somehow. But I guess I'd say, we're happy to talk about specific use cases and work with you guys in IA on that.
We do offer HIPAA compliant GCP in our cloud environment, and then that would come with the CI/CD pipeline that we built. It's for the deployment through the GitLab. So in a sense, yes, we can support that, but I just do not know anybody who stores the data directly in a repository.
Right, and if you're in Google and GitLab's in Google, that theoretically the data is close enough that we're hoping that you won't see much latency.
Yes.
I have a question. So either from GitLab or GitHub, will you be able to deploy to a resource behind the firewall? Let's say you want to deploy some kind of script to an Oracle server. So
I'll say in GitLab, we can specify where your runner would be. Your runner is what does the actions. So we could, for instance, we could work with you to set up a runner in a, in a network of your choosing that you open the firewall to. And I assume Matthew would have to speak if how GitHub actions those.
Yeah. So the GitHub cloud runner runners that they provide do not would not be able to deploy behind like a University of Michigan firewall, but ITS provides our self-hosted runners, which are actually hosted in the container service at ITS, and that would for most cases be able to deploy behind UMich firewall. But like David said, you could always set up your own runner if needed.
And David, is there a cost for using GitLab?
No, we subsidize that for Michigan Medicine.
So even if you're using runners and
Correct.
Okay.
If you're using kind of our runners, if in some cases, if you need your own, you may have to, set up a VM, or you can even set up runners on laptops and that sort of thing, depending on, how you want to schedule it or that. But in general, there wouldn't be a cost, or if it is for your own runner, it would be minimal. But it's more restricted than campus. We don't offer the external users, for instance.
Right. All right. Any more questions for David or Matt? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you so much, David and Matt. I think that was really helpful.
All right, great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.